Good afternoon. Just want to recap a little bit. We talked about Revelation chapter 10, and we talked a little bit about the 10 virgins. And the last point was where Sister White says, we've got nothing to fear for the future, lest we forget how He has led us and the teachings in the past. And it's important to realize it's not just facts and figures what she's dealing with. When we piece everything together like the jigsaw, we're beginning to see that what the Millerites and the early pioneers went through is going to be repeated in the last days. So all the issues that they dealt with, all the crisis they dealt with, all the apostasies they dealt with, is going to be repeated in the very last days. And this is another reason why we mustn't forget how the Lord has led us. She's also counseled us that we should study the pioneers because they knew and understood what truth was and how they built the platform of truth. And she said that spurious ideas are going to come in the last days, every wind of doctrine. And she says, if we understand and grounded in the message, then we will not be shaken and will not be moved. And as I'm studying and becoming more aware of the importance of our message, I'm coming to realize that there are a number of tests that God's people are going to have to face before the second coming. And I think the first test that we're going to have to grapple with is the spirit of prophecy. As I travel around, there are so many people who no longer have confidence in the spirit of prophecy. And Sister White tells us that the spirit of prophecy, her writings are barricaded with truth. And these truths will help us to stand and be ready for the last days. If we reject that counsel, there will be dire consequences for us. We may not see it or realize it, but there are consequences to rejecting the light God has given us. And I believe that is one test. And so often in conversations we'll say Ellen White or spirit of prophecy, and occasionally, in my experience, people will rise up and say, yes, but. Yes, I see what she's saying, but. And the but means that I don't need to follow what she's saying because that was in her time or something. And we have to realize that the principles outlined in the spirit of prophecy is for our safety. It's like a radar system. You knock out the radar system, what's going to happen? The enemy are going to fly right in and they're going to knock you out. So that's important, I believe, is a test. And I think that's why we see the spirit of prophecy under so much attack. And she says that the very last deception before the close of probation will be making of none effect the testimonies. And we see that now. I believe the second test, she says, is the image of the beast. And there is a reference, we can look at it later on, there is a reference, she says, that this will be a great test for the people of God. And like as we learned about the 10 virgins, their probation actually closed before the actual door closed when the wise virgins went into the banquet. And we're in the time now, I believe, where the image of the beast is almost completely formed, where church and state are coming so close together. It's very, very close. The things that are taking place now in the United States, many things are being passed and done which is contrary to the Constitution. We also realize that in the Supreme Court there's now majority people on the Supreme Court who are Catholic and have no hesitation of pushing a Catholic agenda. If the Pope rings up and says, we want this done, they will pass it. The duty of every true Catholic is, first of all, allegiance to the papacy and the Vatican before any other country. And then she says the third great test will be the national Sunday law. So we have three great things that each of us to survive through this crisis and see Christ coming in the air are the three tests. One thing I just want to recap also is, we mentioned it slightly this morning, is this issue about the daily. What's happened is there's all kinds of viewpoints now on the daily, what the abomination of desolation is. And again, if we go back to the pioneer position and how things stood, we have a sure foundation. We find this quotation in early writings. It says, I have seen that the 1843 chart was directed by the hand of the Lord, and that it should not be altered, that the figures were as he wanted them, that his hand was over and hid a mistake in some of the figures, so that none could see it until his hand was removed. Then I saw in relation to the daily that the word sacrifice was supplied by man's wisdom and does not belong to the text, and that the Lord gave the what view? That the Lord gave the correct view of it to those who gave the judgment hour cry. Who gave the judgment hour cry? The Millerites. So now we have direct inspiration that says that the Lord gave them the correct view. So any other view other than what this view they had can only be an incorrect view. Does that make sense? You can't have any dual applications. You either have a correct view or an incorrect view. When union existed before 1844, nearly all were what? United on the correct view of the daily. But in the confusion since 1844, other views have been embraced, and darkness and confusion have followed. Time has not been a test since 1844, and it will never again be a test. At this time when Sister Wright's writing, actually if we just back up a little bit, William Miller, he presented this new view of the daily, which was totally different to the accepted Protestant view. The accepted Protestant view was Christ's heavenly ministry. That was what the daily was. Then William Miller, studying 2 Thessalonians, he then started reading what the man of sin was, and what the abomination and the issues taking place there. And he backed it up and went back to the book of Daniel, and he was able to piece together that the daily was paganism, and that the abomination of desolation was then the man of sin, being the papacy and the Pope. So he had the correct view. And at the time Sister Wright was writing, other ideas were coming in, which was in Adventism was a minority view. And during the 1900s there was a big debate about the daily. And Ellen White said, keep quiet about it. You know, we should have unity and peace. At that time, the new view of the daily, which was really old Protestant thinking of the daily, was a minority position. However, we find ourselves today that position is now the majority view. And the correct view of the daily is now the minority view. And the reason why it's important, because when you look at the daily where it's found in the book of Daniel, there's some very important principles attached to it. Some are the 1290 time period and the 1335 time period. If we remove the landmark of the daily, we then start reinterpreting new timelines, and 1290 and 1335 applies to different times and dates. We've been told that in relation to time, it's been fixed. There's no more test on time. And this is one of the reasons why the daily, the correct view of the daily, is important in understanding what's going to take place during this time. So I just wanted to recap, because I know that was part of what was dealing with earlier on. But it just gives you an example of when we depart from inspiration, or when we depart from the writings of the pioneers, we start accepting all kinds of winds of doctrine, and we go off on all kinds of tangents. Okay, we're going to start part 4. After the presentation, if you've still got some stamina, I thought we'll have some time for questions and answers. I know you've not really had time to see part 1 and part 2, but if there's any areas of the pioneers or church history, then we can bring that up on the questions and answers. By 1874, America was being conquered. Ribbons of steel followed the pioneers westward. Wherever new lines of travel, the pioneers went with them. To more and more places in America, Adventist missionaries travelled, building churches, schools, and publishing houses. One of the things Sister White tells us about our churches, she says it's good counsel that our churches should stay small. up to around about 100,